Mason Sisk, Alabama, 2019.
Mason Sisk, the man accused of killing 5 of his family members in Elkmont in 2019, was...
The story begins in the quiet town of Elkmont, Alabama. The kind of rural place where everyone knows everyone, where life moves slow and Sundays are for church. But on a September night in 2019, the stillness shattered when a 911 call came in from a trembling teenage voice. The caller was 14-year-old Mason Sisk. His words were simple, almost mechanical. His family had been shot. When police arrived at the Sisk home, what they found would haunt even the most hardened officers. Inside the modest white house, 5 people lay dead. Mason's father, 38-year-old John Sisk, his stepmother, 35-year-old Mary Sisk, and Mason's 3 young half-siblings, 6-year-old Grayson, 5-year-old Aurora, and 6-month-old Colson. Each had been shot in the head. The scene was so precise, so methodical, it looked less like a frenzy and more like an execution. And the shooter, according to his own confession, was the boy who had called for help. When the news broke, the town of Elkmont could hardly believe it. Mason had always seemed like an ordinary kid, quiet, polite, maybe a bit withdrawn. His stepmother, Mary, was a beloved special education teacher at Mountain Gap Elementary. Parents described her as the kind of woman who made every student feel seen, loved, and capable. She was the person everyone trusted. The father, John Sisk, worked hard to provide for his blended family. They weren't rich, but they were respected. So why did their teenage son turn their home into a crime scene? According to investigators, the answer began to emerge in fragments. Mason's cousin told police that the killings may have been sparked by a revelation, that Mary, the woman Mason believed was his biological mother, wasn't related to him by blood. When he learned the truth, something inside him changed. He became cold, distant, and angry. What exactly went through Mason's mind in those moments before the massacre remains unclear. But one thing is certain: it didn't appear to haunt him afterward. In the Tennessee Valley Juvenile Detention Center, where he's been held since his arrest, Mason's behavior stunned those assigned to watch over him. His probation officer's report was chilling in its simplicity. Mason does not seem bothered by the fact he's accused of murdering his family. He has not shown any sign of remorse. He didn't speak of his father, his siblings, or the woman who had raised him. He did his schoolwork, followed directions, interacted politely with other detainees. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the lives he had ended were strangers, not family. That emotional flatness disturbed everyone who read the report. Here was a boy who, by all accounts, had annihilated his own bloodline and felt nothing. No nightmares, no regret, no emotion at all. Investigators pieced together the sequence of that horrific night. Mason had waited until his family was asleep. He moved from room to room with his father's handgun, aiming carefully at each head, one by one. When the shooting stopped, he called 911, claiming he had heard gunfire while inside the basement. But when detectives questioned him, his story began to fall apart. Eventually, the boy confessed, calm, detached, unemotional. Prosecutors charged Mason Sisk as an adult. He faced multiple counts of capital murder, including 3 counts for victims under the age of 14, and 1 count for killing 2 or more people. In Alabama, that means life without parole, or death if he had been old enough. As the case unfolded, Elkmont became a town frozen in disbelief. Parents who had once waved to Mason at school events now locked their doors at night. Mary Sisk's colleagues wept at her funeral, describing her as the kind of teacher who changed lives. Her former student's grandmother, Yvonne Miller, said, "If my granddaughter needed anything, she was there. My granddaughter has really excelled in her schoolwork because of her." But for Mason, there was no such outpouring of emotion. Even in custody, reports say, he earned minor disciplinary warnings, not for violence, but for talking without permission. That's what made it worse. He wasn't explosive. He wasn't unstable. He was composed, controlled, and indifferent. Psychologists later described this kind of detachment as a hallmark of deep emotional disconnection, the absence of empathy, the inability to feel the weight of one's own actions. But for the people of Elkmont, that was no comfort. The question they kept asking was simpler. How could a child do this? The revelation about Mason's biological mother, whether true trigger or coincidence, only added to the mystery. Did the discovery really flip a switch in his mind? Or had the darkness been there all along, hiding under a boyish face and polite manners? Even after years of investigation, no one could fully explain it. His motive seemed as empty as his expression. He wasn't seeking revenge, money, or freedom. He simply erased the only people who loved him. At trial, prosecutors described the killings as deliberate, cold, and calculated. They argued that Mason knew exactly what he was doing, down to the final detail. The defense pointed to his age, suggesting that no 14-year-old could truly comprehend the finality of such an act. But the jury saw what investigators saw: a boy with the mind of a killer. As he sat in court, now 15, Mason showed no emotion, no tears, no fear, only stillness. The only sound in the room came from Mary Sisk's family sobbing in the front row. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, the town that had once known Mason Sisk as a neighbor now knew him as a monster. Today, Mason sits behind bars in Limestone County, Alabama, serving life without parole. Reports say he continues to behave well, doing his schoolwork and following directions, just as he did in juvenile detention. The perfect inmate. The polite boy who never talks about the night he wiped out his entire family. His name now sits beside some of the darkest in modern true crime. A reminder that evil doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it sleeps under the same roof, eats at the same table, and calls you mom. The story of Mason Sisk isn't just about murder. It's about the silence that follows, the kind that fills a home when every voice has been taken, and the only person left standing feels nothing at all. Colin Jeffrey, CJ, Haney, Utah.
In a horrific crime. The judge gave CJ, or Colin Jeffrey Haney, the maximum sentence.
The quiet town of Grantsville, Utah, had always moved at its own slow rhythm. Snow-covered streets, familiar faces at every corner, children laughing on the playground. Life here was safe, predictable. But on January 17th, 2020, that rhythm was shattered. Within the walls of one modest home, a nightmare was unfolding, orchestrated by someone who, by all appearances, should have been innocent. 16-year-old Colin Jeffrey CJ Haney. CJ had stayed home from school that day, waiting for each member of his family to arrive, knowing exactly what he intended to do. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a moment of teenage anger. It was calculated, deliberate, chilling in its precision. At 1 p.m., CJ's mother, Consuelo Alejandra Haney, returned home with 12-year-old Milan. The front door clicked open and the sound of footsteps should have been ordinary. But inside, a storm was waiting. CJ fired multiple times, each shot precise. each moment purposeful. His mother, the woman who had nurtured and loved him, was dead within minutes. Milan, his little sister, fell moments later. The house, once filled with warmth, was now a mausoleum. The quiet after those first shots was brief. Around 2 p.m., 15-year-old Alexis arrived home. She laughed at something on her phone, unsuspecting. CJ was ready. Multiple shots to her head and torso ended her life in seconds. There was no scream, no chance to flee, no mercy. By 5:15 p.m., 14-year-old Matthew returned. Perhaps he sensed something was wrong. Perhaps he didn't. One gunshot and he was gone, the echo of it lingering in the walls of the home that had once been filled with life. The father, Colin Haney, arrived at 6:15 p.m., unaware of the carnage awaiting him. CJ shot him in the leg. Pain, confusion, and adrenaline surged. A struggle erupted over the gun. For the first time, the plan faltered. Against all odds, the father wrestled the weapon away from his own son. And then, impossibly, he guided CJ toward the hospital. A neighbor, unaware of the horror that had transpired, stopped by the house to drop something off. They had no idea the bloodshed that had occurred inside. In the car, CJ confessed, "I killed my family." The neighbor called 911. When police arrived, CJ was calm, unnervingly composed. No tears, no panic, no remorse. He refused to speak, leaving authorities grasping for answers. The motive remains a mystery. Scott Broadhead, the county attorney, admitted, "We have no answer at this point as to what his motive or mental state was. Hopefully, it will be developed through time." But for the people of Grantsville, that answer will never fully erase the horror. The town's reaction was immediate and visceral. Candlelight vigils, tears, embraces between neighbors, shock etched on every face. Families huddled together in their homes, questioning how evil could exist behind familiar doors. Photographs of the victims were displayed at City Park, a stark reminder of the lives lost. Consuelo Alejandra Haney was a woman of warmth and compassion. Born in Chihuahua, Mexico, she loved gardening, cooking, and nurturing her children. Her death left a void that could never be filled. Alexis, gifted in art and piano, a soccer goalkeeper with a bright future, was gone. Matthew, the chess-loving, Star Wars-obsessed middle schooler, the quiet thinker and playful spirit, was gone. Milan, a 7th grader with a love for sports and art, a child who left little notes of encouragement for her family, was gone. CJ's father and older brother Danny survived, but at a cost that no family should bear. They were left to navigate a world suddenly emptied of those they loved most, carrying memories intertwined with horror. CJ Haney was charged as an adult with 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of attempted aggravated murder, and 5 counts of discharge of a firearm. If convicted, he faces life without parole. The death penalty was not an option due to his age. Investigators continue to examine electronic devices in hopes of uncovering a motive, a clue to the darkness that led to this tragedy. The sequence of events reveals not just a crime, but a chilling psychological portrait. CJ waited, watched, and executed his plan methodically. There was a cold precision, a detachment that haunts every account. What goes through the mind of a 16-year-old as he waits for the next family member to return, knowing he will end their life? The questions linger, unanswerable, as the town struggles to make sense of what happened. Even the smallest details of that day feel surreal. The quiet laughter of a child arriving home, the ordinary sounds of doors opening and closing, transformed into the setting of unimaginable horror. The neighbor who innocently delivered a package became the first outside witness to CJ's confession. Nicholas Wagoner, Browning, Maryland, 2008.
It's here where 15-year-old Nicholas Browning allegedly killed his father, mother, and 2 younger brothers Friday.
In the winter of 2008, the Browning family of Cockeysville, Maryland, was struck by a tragedy that would shock their community and haunt those who knew them for years to come. 4 lives were lost: a father, a mother, and 2 young sons. The perpetrator was not a stranger, but the eldest son, 16-year-old Nicholas Wagoner Browning, a bright, privileged honor student whose actions would turn the story of a suburban family into a nightmare. Nicholas had been a model student, excelling academically, a varsity lacrosse player, a golfer, a skier, a Boy Scout, and the eldest child of a family deeply involved in their community. His father, John Browning, was a respected local attorney, while his mother, Tamara, devoted herself to raising her children and managing the home. Friends and neighbors remembered the Brownings as generous, loving, and devoted. One neighbor recalled, "These people would do anything in the world for you, just incredible people." But behind this veneer of normalcy, something dark was festering. Nicholas had shown signs of troubling behavior. Classmates said he sometimes spoke of harming his family, but these warnings were ignored as teenage jokes. A psychiatrist would later reveal that Nicholas described the murders as casually as taking out the trash. On that fateful night, Nicholas used his father's 9mm handgun to murder his family. John Browning was shot while sleeping on the couch in the living room. Upstairs, Tamara, along with Gregory, 13, and Benjamin, 11, were killed in their beds. Gregory's classmates described him as a good kid, athletic and full of promise. Benjamin was remembered by neighbors as sweet, energetic, always riding his bike or playing soccer. In a matter of minutes, 4 lives were snuffed out, leaving a community stunned and horrified.
When he came home Saturday evening, officers found the 4 bodies inside the house. Police say they found...
The aftermath revealed a chilling detachment. Nicholas did not immediately report the murders. Instead, he disposed of the handgun in nearby bushes and spent the following hours with friends, even attending a social gathering at his house. It was only when his friends returned him home the next day that the authorities were notified. In a phone call from jail, he callously joked about escaping, saying, "I hate justice. You need to break in here and break me out." Community members struggled to reconcile the image of the polite, intelligent, outgoing boy they knew with the reality of his actions. His lacrosse coach said, "It's totally out of character. Something snapped. Something went wrong. Nick wouldn't hurt a fly." And yet, the evidence of premeditation, coupled with Nicholas's calm and calculated behavior, painted a very different picture. The murders ignited shock, grief, and confusion across Maryland. Candlelight vigils were held in memory of the Browning family. Neighbors wept openly, trying to process how such devastation could come from within a family. Garland Williams, a former neighbor, said simply, "It's just terrible. The whole family was wiped out." At his trial, prosecutors emphasized Nicholas's lack of remorse. They argued that his behavior after the murders, throwing away the gun, socializing, and joking about escape, showed a dangerous and callous mindset. Despite this, during sentencing, Nicholas broke down in court, apologizing to relatives. He was sentenced to 4 life terms, with the possibility of parole after 23 years with good behavior. While imprisoned at the Patuxent Institution, Nicholas's attempt to connect with the outside world through a prison pen pal website sparked controversy. Describing himself as intelligent, funny, and outgoing, he sought correspondence with strangers, further complicating the public perception of him and drawing criticism from the community and media. The Browning murders remain a stark reminder of the complexities of human behavior, the hidden darkness that can exist behind ordinary lives, and the devastating consequences when that darkness manifests. Nicholas Browning's actions destroyed a family, shattered a community, and left questions about motive and morality that may never be fully answered. Ultimately, 4 innocent lives were lost, leaving behind grief, shock, and the haunting knowledge that evil can emerge from the most unexpected places, even from within the home itself. Chateau dies. Joel Guy Jr., Tennessee, 2016.
Continuing coverage of the man convicted of murdering and dismembering his parents at their Knox County home. Today,
under the cold, crisp night sky of late November 2016, the town of Knoxville, Tennessee appeared calm and ordinary. Streetlights cast long shadows across empty sidewalks, and the occasional car hummed softly along quiet streets. Neighbors would later recall that evening as peaceful, with nothing to hint at the horror waiting inside the Guy family home on Birchwood Drive. Joel Guy Jr., 28, lived with his parents, Joel Sr. and Lisa. To outsiders, he was a polite and unobtrusive young man, always courteous, always helpful in small ways. His parents were well respected, Joel Sr. a businessman, and Lisa, a caring mother and community volunteer. They were the kind of people who hosted family dinners, checked in on neighbors, and believed in giving their son every chance to succeed. But behind closed doors, tensions had been simmering. Joel Jr. had grown increasingly withdrawn. Neighbors noticed small changes. Lights burning late into the night, his room door always shut, and occasional muttering that drifted into the hallway. Financial strains and personal frustrations weighed heavily on him. He had been relying on his parents' support for years, expecting them to cover his debts and daily expenses, and resentment had quietly taken root. Lisa had noticed his mood swings and irritability, but she attributed them to stress and exhaustion. Joel Sr. remained hopeful, thinking his son would eventually find his way. Yet signs of something darker emerged, pacing at night, whispered arguments with himself, and online searches about family homicides, methods to dispose of evidence, and ways to avoid capture. On the night of November 26, 2016, the tension reached a deadly peak. Joel Jr. attacked his parents inside their home. What began as a quiet evening descended into chaos in moments. Neighbors reported nothing until the following day.
judge for a new trial. The remains of Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy were found in their home
when the absence of lights and activity drew concern. The aftermath was shocking. Investigators discovered both Joel Sr. and Lisa had been fatally stabbed multiple times. The crime scene revealed meticulous planning, attempts to destroy evidence and cover up the violence. Joel Jr. had fled the house, leaving behind a chilling silence. Hours later, he called 911 from a rest stop, his voice unnervingly calm. I hurt my parents. Police found him waiting quietly by his car, hands folded, showing no resistance. During the investigation, authorities pieced together a story of mounting resentment, financial dependence, and untreated mental illness. Evidence from computers and online searches painted a clear picture of premeditation. At trial, prosecutors emphasized the planning and the calculated nature of the murders. Experts testified about Joel Jr.'s mental state, noting paranoia and detachment, but the jury concluded that he acted with intent. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The town of Knoxville was left stunned. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the image of a polite, quiet young man with the horrific reality. The Guy family home remains a somber reminder of how silently resentment and mental deterioration can build behind familiar doors. Even years later, locals speak of Birchwood Drive in hushed tones, the air heavy with memory. A quiet street marked forever by tragedy. Tyler Hadley, Florida, 2011.
His office indicates that Tyler Hadley hinted to several friends during a party at his family home.
On the afternoon of July 16, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley of Port St. Lucie, Florida, posted a seemingly innocent status on Facebook. "Party at my crib tonight. Maybe." To his friends, it sounded like any other teenage invitation, a hint at music, drinks, and reckless fun. But there was one chilling detail they didn't know. Tyler's parents were home, and at that very moment, they were already dead. Blake and Mary Jo Hadley had tried everything to help their son. They had taken him to psychiatrists, enrolled him in substance abuse programs, and set boundaries to keep him safe. But the warnings, the guidance, and the love couldn't reach the darkness festering inside him. Earlier that week, after Tyler had driven home drunk, Mary Jo had taken away his car and phone. Enraged, Tyler confided in his best friend, Michael Mandel, that he wanted to kill his mother. Mandel thought it was teenage anger, a dark joke, never imagining that Tyler would carry out such a plan. By 5 p.m., Tyler was ready. He took his parents' phone so they couldn't call for help. He ingested ecstasy to steel himself for what he was about to do. Then he found a hammer in the garage. For 5 tense minutes, he stared at the back of his mother's head as she sat at the computer. Then he swung. Mary Jo screamed, "Why?" Her husband Blake ran into the room, hearing the commotion, and echoed the question. Tyler shouted back, "Why the fuck not?" and beat him to death. The murders were calculated, efficient, and horrifyingly detached. After killing his parents, Tyler dragged their bodies into the bedroom, cleaning the crime scene meticulously. Bloody towels and Clorox wipes were tossed onto the bed, a macabre attempt to erase evidence. And then, as if nothing had happened, Tyler began planning his party. By 8:15 p.m., Tyler posted again on Facebook, "Party at my house, HMU." 60 teenagers would soon flood the home, oblivious to the horror hidden just rooms away. In the kitchen, they played beer pong. Cigarettes were stubbed into walls, furniture was overturned, and some even urinated on the neighbor's lawn. At first, Tyler tried to enforce some rules, asking them not to smoke inside, but soon relented, lying that his parents were out of town. Later that night, Tyler pulled aside Michael Mandel, his closest friend, and delivered the unthinkable confession. "Mike, I killed my parents." Mandel froze, disbelief overwhelming him. Tyler led him to the bedroom where the bodies were stashed. Mandel would later recall the moment with horror. "The party's going on over here and I turned the doorknob. I looked down and saw his father's leg against the door. Reality crashed in. Mandel, still in shock, took a selfie with Tyler, his last memory of a friend he once trusted, before fleeing to report the crime anonymously to Crime Stoppers. Police arrived at the Hadley home in the early hours of July 17th. The party was still in full swing. Tyler refused them entry, insisting his parents were out of town. but officers forced their way inside. The house was in chaos. Beer bottles littered the floors, cigars scattered, furniture overturned. Dried blood marked the walls. Under chairs and a coffee table, the bodies of Blake and Mary Jo Hadley were found. Tyler was arrested on the spot, calm yet frantic, and charged with their murders. If police had been delayed, Tyler had even considered taking his own life with a stash of Percocet pills hidden in his room. But for those hours between murder and arrest, Tyler felt an eerie exhilaration. The adrenaline, the drugs, the party, all of it masked the enormity of what he had done. He even posted one last message on Facebook at 4:40 a.m., moments before police reached the house. "Party at my house again, HMU." Tyler Hadley's actions shocked Port St. Lucie and the nation. The deliberate, gruesome murders followed by a house party at the crime scene revealed a chilling lack of remorse, a detachment from reality, and a glimpse into a deeply disturbed mind. 3 years later, he was sentenced to life in prison. But the images, the screams, and the twisted audacity of that night remain etched into the memory of all who learned of the case. It's a story that forces a terrifying question. How could a teenage boy, surrounded by love, guidance, and opportunity, turn so coldly against the very people who cared for him most? Tyler Hadley is a reminder that evil can emerge from where it is least expected, and that sometimes horror exists not in strangers, but within our own homes. Brian Crossman Jr., Vermont, 2025.
Man accused of killing his father, his stepmother, and stepbrother
In the quiet rural town of Paulet, Vermont, a tragedy unfolded that would shock the community and ripple across state lines. On a crisp Sunday morning, the peaceful rhythms of farm life were shattered by violence so sudden, so brutal, that neighbors could hardly comprehend it. At the center of this horror was 22-year-old Brian Crossman Jr., accused of murdering his father, his stepmother, and her 13-year-old son. Brian Crossman, 46, a local official newly elected to the Paulet Select Board, had been working hard to rebuild his life and his family. His wife, Erica, 41, and her young son, Colin Taft, were part of this fresh start. A blended family living together on a picturesque Vermont farm that had been in the family for generations. The morning, like any other, should have been ordinary. But ordinary was not to last. Authorities say that Crossman Jr. allegedly shot his father multiple times in the head and torso. Erica Crossman was killed with at least one gunshot to the head, and young Colin suffered multiple fatal gunshot wounds. The scene inside the home was described as blood-soaked and chaotic, with a gun and shell casings recovered, silent witnesses to the carnage. In a bizarre twist, Brian Crossman Jr. reportedly called 911 himself, telling authorities that he had gone for a walk and returned to find his family slain. The story, meant to exonerate him, quickly fell apart under investigation. Detectives noted inconsistencies in his account, and a search of his phone revealed disturbing activity. Queries related to serial killers and cold case murders, hinting at a dark fascination that went beyond a simple family dispute. Neighbors and relatives painted a complex portrait of Crossman Jr. He had struggled with a learning disability and a history of mental health challenges. He had aggressive episodes in the past, but no one expected him to escalate to murder. Family members described a troubled relationship with his father, tensions that had grown over time, yet never enough to suggest such a catastrophic outcome. The farm itself, a symbol of continuity and hard work, became a backdrop for tragedy. Brian Crossman had married Erica just months earlier in June, striving to unite the family and run the property with care. Neighbors recalled seeing him laboring in the fields, tending to the farm, trying to forge a new beginning. And yet, within the walls of that home, a young man's rage, and perhaps something deeper, turned deadly. Crossman Jr. was arrested by New York State Police on Friday and charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. He made a court appearance in Warren County Court in Lake George, where he was ordered held without bail, pending extradition to Vermont. The alleged murders left questions hanging in the air. What drove him to commit such a horrific act? Was it premeditation, impulsive rage, or a combination of unresolved mental health struggles and deep-seated family tensions? As investigators continue to piece together the timeline, the community is left grappling with disbelief and grief. A farm that once symbolized generations of family effort has become a scene of unimaginable loss. Neighbors mourn the victims while trying to reconcile the image of a young man they knew with the chilling acts he is accused of committing. The story of Brian Crossman Jr. is a stark reminder that violence can erupt even in the most seemingly peaceful places, and that the bonds of family, though strong, are not impervious to hidden darkness. Questions about motive, mental state, and premeditation will linger as the investigation unfolds. For now, the legacy of the Crossman family is one of loss, shock, and the haunting question of how a son could turn against his own blood with such deadly resolve. In Paulet, Vermont, the echoes of that Sunday morning still resonate. A father, a stepmother, and a young boy lives ended abruptly, leaving a community to confront the terrifying reality that even familiar faces can harbor unimaginable danger. Matthew Cushing, Maine, 2008. On February 20th, 2008, the quiet town of Old Orchard Beach, Maine, was jolted awake by a fire call that would uncover a scene of unimaginable horror. Firefighters arrived at the home of Christopher and Carol Bolduc, owners of a small local business called Blustery Day Flags. What first appeared to be a fire turned into a gruesome discovery. Inside were the bodies of Christopher, his wife Carol, their 15-year-old son Joshua, and even the family dog, Spike. All had been stabbed multiple times. The fire, investigators later concluded, had been set to cover the murders. The only surviving member of the immediate family was Matthew Cushing, Carol's 21-year-old son from a previous relationship, who lived 2 hours away while attending the University of Maine. Almost immediately, authorities began to focus on Matthew as a suspect. Though the town had never seen trouble in the Bolduc household, and neighbors described them as quiet and unassuming, the investigation quickly gathered evidence that would seal Matthew's fate. Carol's car had been moved from the driveway to a park, and blood and DNA evidence linked Matthew directly to the crime scene. Investigators believed that Matthew had laid in wait, armed with a stun gun and a knife. As family members returned home that day, he allegedly used the stun gun to incapacitate each one before stabbing them to death. Joshua, his half-brother, was likely the first to die, possibly after an argument regarding family tensions or Matthew's own personal frustrations. Next was Carol, who may have been killed to prevent her from reporting Joshua's death. Finally, Christopher, the father, was murdered, believed to be Matthew's primary target from the outset. Even Spike, the family dog, was not spared, a grim testament to the calculated nature of the killings. The motive behind the murders remains partially obscured. Christopher and Carol had reportedly been separating after Christopher revealed he was homosexual and planned to move to South Carolina. Some theories suggest Matthew may have acted out of concern for his mother, or from anger over her relationship with Christopher. Others speculate that Matthew's desire to leave school and backpack through Europe, a plan his parents did not support, sparked resentment that boiled over into fatal violence. Regardless of the reasoning, the brutality of the murders shocked the community and left lasting scars. 2 days after the murders, on February 22, 2008, Matthew Cushing was arrested. Eventually, he would plead guilty to 3 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. At his sentencing on March 25, 2009, Matthew expressed extreme remorse, but never fully explained why he had carried out such a horrific act. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated, deliberate nature of the crime, highlighting that Matthew had waited, planned, and executed each murder in a methodical sequence. The plea prevented a trial, meaning the public would never hear the exact details of each moment inside the Bolduc home. Matthew received life without parole for each of the murders and 20 years for arson. According to the Maine Department of Corrections, he will never be released. In Maine, a life sentence truly means life. Even years later, the story of the Bolduc family remains haunting. Visiting their graves reveals a poignant reminder of the lives lost. Joshua, Christopher, Carol, and even Spike, their loyal dog, memorialized together. Spike's inclusion on the headstone as a family member underscores the depth of loss and the surreal, tragic nature of the crime. The murders of the Bolduc family are a chilling reminder that violence can erupt from within, that family bonds can be broken by dark impulses, and that even the quietest communities can harbor unimaginable horror. Matthew Cushing's actions on that February day left a permanent scar on Old Orchard Beach, forever altering the memory of a family that was, by all appearances, ordinary and loving. Jake Hemmert, Florida, 2023. Retirement community in Florida. A gruesome crime unfolded that would shock friends, family, and neighbors alike. Jake Hemmert, 32, a man living with his father, Brian Hemmert, 60, would later be convicted of shooting him to death and attempting.
Monday morning, when Jake Hemmert accepted a plea deal, he'll spend 30 years in prison for murdering his father. According to an LCSO probable cause statement, deputies searched the Alva home nearly a year ago and located a large chest freezer. Inside the freezer was the body of Brian Hemmert.
To cover up the murder in one of the most chilling ways imaginable. The story began when Brian Hemmert's father reported him missing on August 28, 2023. It had been months since June since anyone had heard from him. Deputies from the Lee County Sheriff's Office were dispatched for a welfare check at the home. The property seemed empty at first. No one was inside, no cars in the driveway. But then Jake arrived in his father's vehicle. Calm, collected, or perhaps carefully rehearsed. He told deputies that his father was away on a hunting trip in the western United States, and that he had spoken to him recently on the phone. Yet Jake refused to let authorities into one bedroom, claiming it was where his father kept his guns. Deputies noticed his nervous demeanor, a subtle tension that hinted something was off. When they pinged Brian's cell phone, it was inside the home, contradicting Jake's story. Soon the investigation uncovered more anomalies. An outstanding warrant for Jake out of Maricopa County, Arizona, led to his temporary arrest. And a detective's interview began peeling back the layers of deception. Jake maintained that his father had fled the country to fight human trafficking. a claim that seemed increasingly implausible, but investigators had already started to piece together a sinister puzzle. A large chest freezer delivered on June 22, 2023 had mysteriously disappeared from plain sight. The purchase coincided with abnormal credit card usage and changes in Brian's phone activity. Investigators would later discover that Jake himself had bought the freezer with his father's credit card. Further digging revealed even more disturbing behavior. Jake had begun selling his father's tools on Facebook Marketplace, seemingly profiting from Brian's absence. And then, during a second search of the home on September 7, 2023, detectives discovered the large chest freezer, cleverly concealed under piles of supplies. Duct-taped shut and running, it contained Brian Hemmert's body, shot to death, hidden in the chilling confines of the freezer. In the months following the murder, Jake had been brazenly using his father's credit card, racking up over $23,000 in charges, and was captured on video using it at ATMs. When confronted, he initially claimed that Brian had allowed him to use the card to pay homeowners association fees, a thin veil of normalcy masking his crime. Finally, on September 13, 2023, Jake Hemmert confessed. He admitted to shooting his father in bed, claiming that it was done at his father's request, that Brian had wanted to end his own life. He described cleaning up the scene, destroying the mattress in trash bags, and attempting to erase any evidence of the murder. But no amount of planning or deception could erase the horror of his actions. Jake Hemmert was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a human body, and fraudulent use of a credit card. At his sentencing, the victim impact statement from his sister, Jessica Hemmert, cut through the sterile court atmosphere. Every day for the last 354 days, I've had the same thought. I can't forgive. I've been tormented for the last 354 days, and after our father's death, I planned his funeral and plan to celebrate his life because the years to come he will never be a part of. The chilling details of the freezer, the calculated use of Brian's money, and the brazen deception paint a stark portrait of a son who murdered his own father and attempted to mask it with acts of mundane normalcy. In Florida, and to the family left behind, the echoes of that crime will linger for a lifetime, a chilling reminder of how dark impulses can hide behind the most familiar faces. John Emil List, New Jersey, 1971. The lights inside the mansion went out one by one. First the porch, then the hallway, then the ballroom. By Christmas, the house on Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey stood in complete darkness. Cold, silent, and empty. Neighbors whispered that something was wrong inside Breeze Knoll. The List family had vanished, but no one could imagine the truth. That a man who seemed like the perfect father had calmly executed his wife, his mother, and all three of his children, then vanished without a trace. John Emil List was a man molded by control. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, to strict German Lutheran parents, he grew up in a home ruled by order and silence. His father referred to him only as the boy. His mother, Alma, was obsessively protective, teaching him that the world was dangerous, sinful, and full of corruption. He learned that cleanliness was godliness, that emotion was weakness, and that disobedience was sin. As he grew into adulthood, the lessons hardened into something cold and absolute. List served in the army during World War II, earned a degree in accounting, and built the image of a respectable man, conservative, quiet, disciplined. In 1951, he met Helen Taylor, a widow who had been through her own suffering. Scarred physically by a medical accident and mentally by loss, she clung to John as a savior. They married quickly and had 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. On the surface, they were a model family, church-going, respectable, polite. But behind closed doors, the house was governed by one rule: John's word was law. In 1965, the Lists moved into an impressive 19-room mansion in Westfield called Breeze Knoll. To Helen, it was a dream. To John, a symbol of status. But within years, that dream curdled into pressure. He lost his job at the bank, and instead of admitting it, he pretended everything was fine. Every morning, he dressed in a suit, carried his briefcase, and took the train, only to sit at the station reading newspapers all day. His pride couldn't bear the thought of humiliation. Bills mounted, Helen drank more, and his elderly mother, Alma, who had financed part of the home, moved into the 3rd floor, deepening the tension. Neighbors noticed how strange he was, mowing the lawn in a suit and tie, refusing social invitations, keeping to himself. To everyone around him, John List was the embodiment of quiet respectability. In truth, he was unraveling. He saw his wife's illness, his daughter's rebelliousness, and his son's ambitions as threats to the moral order he believed he had to protect. Helen mocked his faith. Patricia dreamed of being an actress, a profession he saw as sinful. His son, John Jr., was growing independent. To List, it wasn't just that his family was slipping away. Their souls were. He feared he was losing control, not only of his home, but of their salvation. By late 1971, he was unemployed, broke, and desperate. He told himself that if the family faced financial ruin, it would destroy their faith and send them to hell. In his twisted logic, there was only one way to save them. "I finally decided," he later told investigators, "the only way to save them from that was to kill them." On the morning of November 9th, 1971, Helen sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. John walked up behind her, raised his pistol, and fired a bullet through her jaw. She died instantly. He climbed the stairs and shot his mother in the face. Then he went downstairs and cleaned the blood. Hours later, when his children returned from school, he met each one calmly at the door and shot them from behind. 16-year-old Patricia and 13-year-old Frederick died quickly. His middle child, 15-year-old John Jr., resisted. His body was found riddled with bullets. List arranged the bodies of his wife and children on sleeping bags in the ballroom, turned on classical music through the house intercom, and prayed over them. He left his mother's body upstairs because she was too heavy to move. Then he made himself a sandwich. "I was hungry," he later explained. Before leaving, he wrote a 5-page confession to his pastor, apologizing for the burden his actions would place on the church and asking that funeral costs be kept low. He canceled deliveries, told schools and neighbors the family was going to North Carolina, and turned off the heat to conserve oil. Then he locked the doors and disappeared. For nearly a month, no one suspected anything, but the neighbors grew uneasy. The lights inside the house, which had been left on, began to burn out one by one. Classical music still echoed faintly from inside, and by December, the house smelled strange. When police entered, the air was freezing. They found the 5 decomposing bodies, covered neatly with towels. The father was missing. The case shocked America. Who could do such a thing, and why? The mansion stood empty for months before it mysteriously burned down in 1972, destroying any remaining evidence. Meanwhile, John List had vanished so completely that investigators wondered if he was dead. But he wasn't. He had boarded a bus, traveled west, and reinvented himself as Robert P. Clark. He found work as an accountant in Denver, attended church, and even remarried. For nearly 18 years, he lived a new life, quiet and polite, as if the slaughter in Westfield had never happened. In 1989, the TV show America's Most Wanted featured the List case. A forensic sculptor, Frank Bender, created a clay model predicting what List might look like nearly 2 decades later. The bust was uncanny. Glasses, thinning hair, the same rigid expression. Viewers across the country were stunned, and one woman in Denver recognized him immediately. Her former neighbor, Bob Clark, looked exactly like the man on TV. She called the FBI. Days later, agents arrived at Clark's home in Richmond, Virginia, where he now lived with his second wife, Dolores. When confronted, he insisted he wasn't John List, but fingerprints didn't lie. 18 years after the murders, the man who killed his entire family was finally under arrest. At his trial in 1990, List appeared emotionless. He claimed he hadn't killed out of hatred, but out of love, to save their souls from damnation. The jury didn't believe him. He was convicted on all 5 counts and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. Outside the courtroom, the town of Westfield mourned anew. For nearly 2 decades, they had lived with a ghost story, never knowing if the killer next door might return. List served his sentence quietly, reading the Bible, keeping to himself, never expressing remorse. He died in prison in 2008, aged 82. Seth South, Washington, 2024. The morning of October 9, 2024, began quietly in Kitsap County, Washington. A neighborhood that had always felt safe would soon be shattered by an act of familial violence so incomprehensible, it would leave the entire community in shock. At the center of it all was Seth South, a man who, according to authorities, allegedly turned on his own half-brothers. It started with a call to 911. Calm, measured, almost casual. Seth reported that one of his half-brothers had slit his own throat. But then, the line went silent. Moments later, the dispatcher heard sounds of a struggle. Frantic, raw, and terrifying. Deputies rushed to the scene, and what they found was a nightmare. 2 young adult males, dead. The quiet suburban home, once a place of family and safety, had become a crime scene. A warrant for Seth South's arrest was issued immediately. Before the authorities could arrive, Seth had already left a trail of chaos. According to charging documents, he had confessed to family members that he killed the 2 young men. The victims were his half-brothers, though their identities were not released. The betrayal of blood, the ultimate breach of trust, left friends and neighbors reeling. When deputies located Seth, he was in his vehicle. Body camera footage later showed a tense standoff. He sat behind the wheel, eyes darting, chest tight, a mix of defiance and adrenaline coursing through him. Deputies called for compliance. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, in a sudden burst, they forcibly removed him from the car, pressing him to the ground. Every movement was met with resistance, a violent assertion of control from a man cornered by the consequences of his actions. But the confrontation did not end there. At the Kitsap County Detective's office, Seth allegedly assaulted an officer while being re-handcuffed. The struggle caused injury and damaged the interview room. a stark visual of his refusal to submit even when fully in custody. The act resulted in an additional charge of third-degree assault, layering the initial horror with new evidence of aggression and volatility. Police also reported finding blood inside Seth's vehicle, a silent, grim testimony to what had occurred hours before. As investigators pieced together the events, a chilling picture emerged. A man who meticulously executed an act of violence against his own family, then displayed disturbing composure in the aftermath. The neighborhood, normally quiet and predictable, was left grappling with disbelief.
People whispered behind closed doors. How could someone kill his own brothers? What could drive a man to such brutality?
The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, as friends and relatives tried to reconcile the image of Seth they knew with the horror of what he had allegedly done. For law enforcement, the arrest was only the beginning. Investigators needed to understand motive, opportunity, and mindset. For the community, the trauma was immediate and visceral. Homes that once represented safety now echoed with fear. Families who had thought bloodlines were unbreakable now faced the stark reality that violence can erupt from those closest to us. Seth South now faces 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of third-degree assault. Each charge tells a story of horror, betrayal, and the dark potential that can reside within a single human mind. Authorities continue to gather evidence, interview witnesses, and reconstruct the timeline of that fateful day.
The chilling lesson of Seth South's alleged actions is clear. Evil can emerge in the most familiar places, and trust, especially familial trust, is not always enough to prevent catastrophe. Kitsap County and all who hear this story are left to confront the unthinkable, that violence can strike from within, and sometimes it is blood that carries the deepest betrayal.
In the silence that follows, the memory of that October day lingers. 2 young lives lost, 1 man accused of shattering the bonds of family, and a community left grappling with questions that may never find answers.